Hello, everybody. I'm John Felt. Welcome to the weekly Water Outlook, September 27th, 2015. Hope your week is going well, the first week in fall. This is usually a quiet time of the year. We're before the secondary severe weather season, and I'll be watching for that very closely. That's when we still have moisture, deeper moisture, and at the same time we start to have more vigorous upper energy in the atmosphere. And usually this is a little bit early for that. It's not until later in October and November, and that is a transition between fall and the very early part of winter. So right now it can be a very quiet season. Harvest is in progress, and really, unless we get some tropical activity, it can be a very quiet time of the year. Now, it was very quiet over large parts of the nation here. You can see very little, if any, rain over a large part of the nation. Even if we get down into the Oklahoma, Texas area, Arkansas, Louisiana, very quiet weather, a little bit more precipitation, a couple little pockets right there in the central part of Oklahoma. But really the two areas of more significant are the inflow of moisture that came in from the Atlantic that pushed into parts of the mid-Atlantic states, Virginia, North and South Carolina, smaller part of Georgia. And look at the way this pushed into the higher elevations here. And when we get that moisture that gets into the higher elevations, it becomes enhanced or graphically enhanced, and then we get additional heavier rainfall amounts. And that's why you see that axis of red right along the spine of the Appalachians. We also have some more isolated rainfall over parts of the Missouri River Basin, right smack in the middle part of the nation. But pretty much everywhere else was very quiet. So when we look at percent of normal, you can see the above normal precipitation as indicated in purple, as much as 2 to 3 times normal over the mid-Atlantic region. Not all areas received some rain. You can actually see some areas remained below normal. That's indicated in yellow and red over the coastal parts of the Carolinas. Other areas received quite a heavy rain, so a bit scattered in coverage. Look at parts of Texas. See very little precipitation, well below normal for the week. So soil moisture here, we really need additional precipitation. I think I mentioned last week how the southeast U.S., especially the mid-Atlantic states, Virginia, North and South Carolina, typically get some form of tropical moisture that helps replenish soil moisture, and it was needed this week, the areas that did receive it. The central part of the state, you can see in areas in green, we still have a pocket of wet soils right over the central part of the state. It's very isolated, so from a harvest condition, most areas it's great harvesting weather, dry, able to get in the fields no problem, but there could be some very isolated issues right there along the Iowa-Nebraska border. If we look further west, we see continued well below normal soil moisture in the far west. We're looking at percentiles well less than 10% of normal. So when we look at flooding, we do see some response. We see in Florida, which has been, we've had a number of pulses of precipitation in that region. We still have some high flows. Then we see along the spine of the Appalachian here, we see some higher flows. And then we do see some spotty areas here with some high flows. Everywhere else is fairly quiet, and if we look at the drought flows, the very low flows, we see a large part of the western U.S. quite dry. Then we see the southern tier of the U.S. generally on the dry side. And even in the area that received some heavier precipitation, it started out so low flows that we still could use additional rainfall from either a soil moisture perspective or a river or stream flow perspective. Now this is that culprit that's brought some of the moisture in. And one of the things in my career that I've always really found interesting are plumes of tropical moisture. Not necessarily the big hurricanes or the tropical storms or even the tropical depression, but just sustained plumes of tropical moisture. And if they stay in place for a while, not only can they produce a lot of heavy rain, but they can bring it well inland. So in this case, you can see the flows. I put some vectors in here at a atmospheric level just off the Earth's surface, also with some moisture here in green, and you can see that axis is still continuing to push into parts of the mid-Atlantic state from the Atlantic Ocean. But if we look at the tropics here, we see that that is not an organized tropical system in any way. It's really not all that impressive right now as it was a number of days ago, but there are a number of weak systems out there. You can see them. I think this week the one we're going to want to keep an eye on is the one in the Gulf that's going to drift very slowly up to the north. There's really no sign that that's going to develop, although there is a 30% probability, so we're going to have to keep an eye on it. It could turn into a very weak system as it moves up towards the north, but whether or not it does, it really is irrelevant from a precipitation standpoint, because it does have the possibility or the probability of taking that moisture and transporting it northward. So when we look at the 5-day outlook here, you can see the two systems, the medium probability of development is indicated in orange, and the lower probability is in yellow. I think this week the one we're going to want to look at is this one pushing up here towards the southeast coast. Okay, so let's look at the jet stream and the big picture before I get it to look at precipitation. And this week we see the jet stream a bit further north than normal. That's indicated in the brown. There's not a lot of energy in there. You don't normally see that this time of year. And here are your temperatures. Generally, under that ridge of high pressure out in the west, very warm temperatures in the Intermountain region. Everywhere else, for the most part, either a little bit above normal, a little bit below normal, in a broad normal type of pattern. If we go out a little bit further, early October, models haven't been all that consistent here, so I'm a little bit skeptical here, but it does bring a little bit of a dip in the jet stream here, and that if that does occur, we would expect some cooling as we get into the early first week in October. And you can see it's sort of centered over the central part of the Midwest, parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. Again, there's not a lot of energy with this, so the main impact most likely will be maybe a temperature change with a cold front going through, not so much impacts on precipitation. And then as we get towards the period October 7th through 12th, very uneventful jet stream, although we'll have to keep an eye on this here. Sometimes when you have this type of flow, you have embedded systems in here, and they do eject out into this region. But right now, it looks fairly quiet. And if we look at temperatures again, temperatures either a little bit above or a little bit below. So I don't see any real drastic drastic and prolonged temperature type patterns looking forward. Now, having said that, let's look at precipitation. Now, this week, we have this first system coming in from the Gulf. It's going to push up to the north very slowly. That could bring some heavy rain to the northeast Gulf Coast. Right now, it looks like it's going to be very much confined to the immediate coast. And then we have that secondary push of moisture heading up into the northeast U.S., and as a cold front pushes through later this week, we're going to have a daily chance of some heavy rain. So those are the two areas of heavy rain, and then a more localized rain in Nebraska. That's going to be very localized. So when we look at the next 4 weeks, here are precipitation anomalies. The action spot this week is isolated over the southeast U.S. and then more significant as we go up towards the northeast U.S. Again, any precipitation along the spine of the Appalachians is likely to be enhanced, but really I think sort of the mid-Atlantic up into the northeast, especially along the immediate coast, looks like a pretty rainy period this week. Now, week 2, if we look ahead into week 2, it looks like the southeast U.S., at least models right now, are showing negative or drier than normal conditions. Maybe in the middle part of the country some precipitation, but I really think this time of year with such weak type of patterns, these anomalies, the reliability is not quite as good as it would be other times of the year. Here's week 3 and week 4. So overall, I think from a big perspective, most of the region, it looks fairly quiet. I think for the southeast U.S., we're going to have to see where that moisture comes in from the Gulf. If it does push up a little bit more, right now it looks like if it does, it's going to be very slow in doing so. So I think we have quite a ways out there before we have to worry about that. Other than that, and the northeast U.S., it looks like a fairly quiet period. Now, this is that area I said we want to look at here for the heavy rain from the 28th of this month into the 1st of October, and that would be that system pushing in and pushing that moisture. I can't rule out that it wouldn't intensify a bit and become a tropical system, more organized, but like I said, I think the main issue is just going to be the heavy rain as it pushes that moisture further to the north. So that's this week's Outlook. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I have quite a bit on my docket to convey as far as content, so I'm sort of trying to pace it. It seems like I can sometimes put something out every day, but I often think that's too much. So I have some good things I want to put out this week, so stay tuned, and we'll be talking with you again next weekend.